The morphine couldn't numb the pain cutting through my chest, but it wasn't from my 3 broken ribs. Through the paper-thin hospital wall, I heard my daughter Jessica's voice, bright and cheerful in a way that made my blood freeze. "Mom's plane crashed. Finally, we can sell everything, Brad. The farm, the antiques, all of it. We're free." My hands trembled against the hospital sheets as 28 years of single motherhood shattered in that moment. The daughter I'd sacrificed everything for was celebrating my death. I forced myself to remain perfectly still, barely breathing, as Jessica's conversation continued just outside my room in Denver Regional Hospital. The crash had happened 3 days ago. A small commuter plane that went down during a storm over the Colorado Rockies. Somehow, I'd survived when 6 others hadn't, though the doctors said it'd been unconscious for 72 hours. "Brad, listen to me." Jessica's voice carried clearly through the wall. "The estate sale company can start this weekend. I already called them yesterday when we thought she was gone. We can still do this. I mean, look at her condition. The doctor said her recovery is going to be long and expensive." My heart pounded so hard I worried the monitors would give me away. This was my daughter, my only child, the little girl. I'd rocked through countless nights after her father died in a construction accident when she was only 4 years old. I'd worked double shifts as a substitute teacher, cleaned houses on weekends, and sold my mother's china piece by piece to keep food on our table and a roof over our heads. "The farm alone is worth at least $400,000, Jessica continued, her voice growing more excited. "And you know how she hoards all that old junk. Some of those antiques are worth serious money. My appraiser friend said that dining room set could bring in $15,000 easy. I thought about that dining room set, my grandmother's hand-carved walnut table where Jessica had done her homework every night, where Wed celebrated every birthday and holiday, where I'd helped her plan her wedding just 5 years ago. The same wedding I'd emptied my retirement savings to pay for because she and Brad couldn't afford the venue she wanted." A nurse entered my room, her soft-soled shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. I kept my eyes closed, listening as she checked my IV and adjusted my blankets. Through the thin wall, Jessica's voice continued. "The doctors told me yesterday not to get my hopes up. They said even if she wakes up, the brain trauma might have affected her memory and decision-making. We could probably get power of attorney pretty easily." The nurse paused in her duties, and I sensed her listening too. When Jessica's voice faded as she moved down the hallway, the nurse leaned close to my ear. "Mrs. Patterson, I know you can hear me," she whispered. "Your vitals spike every time your daughter visits. I need you to know something important. When you were first brought in, you were listed as deceased. Your daughter never corrected that information. She told the administrative staff not to waste resources on extraordinary measures." My eyes flew open, meeting the kind brown eyes of the young nurse whose name tag read Sarah. She glanced toward the door, then back to me. "There's something else," Sarah continued quietly. "Yesterday, when the doctor explained your injuries and treatment plan, your daughter asked specifically about the cost. When he mentioned the bills could reach $50,000, she said, and I quote, 'Well, that settles it then. Sometimes we have to accept when it's time to let go.' The morphine couldn't touch this kind of pain. This was the child I'd spent sleepless nights nursing through every fever, every scraped knee, every broken heart. I'd missed countless social events, turned down dating opportunities, and lived in the same tiny rental house for 15 years just to save money for her college fund. She's been telling people you've been becoming confused lately," Sarah added, her voice barely audible. "Something about forgetting conversations and making poor financial decisions. The social worker noted it in your file." As Sarah quietly left the room, I stared at the water-stained ceiling tiles and tried to process what I'd learned. Jessica hadn't just been hoping for my death. She'd been laying groundwork for it. The realization cut deeper than any physical injury from the crash. Through the wall, I heard Jessica return, this time on the phone with someone else. "Hi, Mrs. Chen. This is Jessica, Selena Patterson's daughter. I wanted to let you know about Mom's accident." Her voice took on a practiced tone of grief. "The doctors aren't optimistic. She's been struggling with some memory issues lately. I'm sure you've noticed when you've tried to call her." "Yes, that's why her phone calls have been so short recently. It's been really hard watching her decline." Mrs. Chen had been my neighbor and friend for over 20 years. We talked on the phone at least twice a week, and there was nothing wrong with my memory. Jessica was systematically destroying my relationships while I lay supposedly unconscious. I know she'd want you to have something to remember her by, Jessica continued. Why don't you come by the house this weekend? We're having an estate sale, but I could set aside that flower vase she always admired in your garden. The blue one? Consider it a gift from Mom. That blue vase had belonged to my mother. It was one of the few things I had left of her, and Jessica knew how much it meant to me. She was giving away my memories like party favors while planning my funeral. I closed my eyes and forced myself to think clearly through the rage and heartbreak. The crash had been survivable, but this betrayal might not be. I needed to understand exactly what Jessica had done and what she was planning. More importantly, I needed to figure out how to protect myself from my own daughter. The machines around me beeped steadily as I lay there, very much alive, listening to my child plan my financial burial. 2 days later, I discharged myself from the hospital against medical advice. The doctors wanted to keep me for another week, but I couldn't risk Jessica discovering I was conscious and alert. I told them my insurance wouldn't cover an extended stay, and reluctantly, they provided me with pain medication and a list of warning signs to watch for. I checked into a budget motel 6 miles from the hospital, paying cash and using my maiden name. The desk clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, didn't ask questions when I explained I'd been in a car accident and needed somewhere quiet to recover. My entire body ached as I settled into the small room with its faded floral bedspread and ancient air conditioning unit. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of what I'd overheard. I needed to know exactly what Jessica had been doing and how far her deception reached. From my motel room, I called my own house phone. Jessica answered on the second ring. Patterson residence. Her voice sounded professional, almost businesslike. I disguised my voice, making it higher and adding a slight southern accent. Hi, this is Margaret from Estate Sales of Colorado. You called about organizing a sale. Oh yes, thank you for calling back so quickly, Jessica replied, her tone brightening immediately. My mother passed away in that plane crash you probably heard about on the news. We need to clear out her house as soon as possible. The property is going on the market next month. Passed away. She was telling complete strangers I was dead while I sat 6 miles away, very much alive. I'm so sorry for your loss, the estate sale woman said. How large is the property? It's a 4-bedroom farmhouse on 12 acres, Jessica explained. Built in 1928, but she kept it in good condition. Lots of antiques, some jewelry, farming equipment, probably enough for a 2-day sale. And you have clear title to organize this sale. Oh yes. I'm the only heir. My mother never remarried after my father died. And I'm an only child. I've been managing her affairs for the past few months anyway, since she started having some cognitive issues. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking with fury. Cognitive issues. I'd taught high school mathematics for 35 years and had tutored advanced calculus students right up until my retirement 2 years ago. My mind was as sharp as it had ever been. I drove my rental car to my farmhouse, parking across the street behind a stand of cottonwood trees where I could observe without being seen. What I saw made my stomach drop. There were already signs posted on the front gate. Estate sale this weekend and property for sale, contact Hartley Realty. Jessica's car was in my driveway, along with a white van I didn't recognize. Through my living room windows, I could see strangers walking around, pointing at my furniture, handling my belongings. A man with a clipboard was photographing everything. I called the real estate office listed on the sign. Hartley Realty, this is Tom speaking. Hi. I'm calling about the Patterson property on Rural Route 47. Can you tell me about the listing? Absolutely. That's a beautiful 12-acre farm property. The family is motivated to sell quickly due to a family tragedy. They're asking $375,000, but I think they'd consider offers in the mid-300s. Are you interested in scheduling a viewing? Who listed the property? Jessica Patterson, the owner's daughter. She has power of attorney to handle the estate matters. Power of attorney. I'd never signed any such document, which meant Jessica had either forged my signature or filed fraudulent paperwork. Either way, it was illegal. That evening, I sat in my motel room and went through my purse, looking for anything Jessica might have taken or tampered with. My credit cards were still there, but when I called the customer service number, I discovered something alarming. Mrs. Patterson, I show that your account has been accessed several times in the past 3 months, the customer service representative explained. There have been significant cash advances totaling $8,400. I didn't authorize any cash advances. The transactions show they were made with your PIN number at various ATM locations around Denver. I also show that your mailing address was changed 6 weeks ago to a post office box. It never changed my mailing address or given anyone my PIN number. Jessica had obviously been watching me enter it at some point and had been systematically draining my accounts while intercepting my bank statements. I need to dispute those transactions, I said, and I need my mailing address changed back to my home address immediately. Of course. I'll start the dispute process. But I have to tell you, Mrs. Patterson, this type of activity often involves family members. You might want to consider filing a police report. After I hung up, I called my bank. The news there was even worse. Mrs. Patterson, your checking account shows a balance of $312, the bank representative told me. There have been several large withdrawals in the past 2 months, including one for $15,000 just 2 weeks ago. I didn't make any large withdrawals. This withdrawal was made with your debit card and PIN at our main branch downtown. The teller noted that your daughter was with you and that you seemed confused about the transaction amount. My daughter had been stealing from me systematically, using my supposed confusion as cover, but had never been to that bank branch with Jessica, which meant Shed either forged my identification or convinced someone I was incapacitated. I spent the next morning at the public library, using their computer to check my email accounts. What I found there shook me to my core. Jessica had been using my email to communicate with my friends and family, sending messages that portrayed me as increasingly forgetful and dependent on her. One email to my sister Patricia in California read, "Hi Pat, this is Jessica using Mom's email. She asked me to let you know she's doing fine, but she's been having some trouble remembering to return phone calls lately. The doctor says it's normal aging, but we're keeping an eye on it. She gets frustrated when people ask her too many questions about things she can't remember, so maybe keep your calls short and simple. Love, Jessica." For Mom. Another email, sent to my former teaching colleague and close friend Martha, was even more manipulative. "Martha, this is Jessica. Mom has been talking about you a lot lately, but she seems confused about some of your shared memories. Yesterday, she insisted you two had lunch last week, but I know that's not possible since you live in Phoenix now. The doctor says this kind of confusion is common, but it's hard to watch. Maybe it's better if we limit her phone calls for a while until we can get her evaluated. I hope you understand, Jessica." Martha had moved to Phoenix 5 years ago, and we'd never had lunch last week, but Jessica's email would have effectively ended my friendship with one of my closest confidantes while making me seem delusional. I found email after email like this, each one carefully designed to isolate me from my support network while building Jessica's narrative that I was becoming mentally incompetent. She'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. But the worst discovery was yet to come. In my sent folder, I found an email ID never written, sent to my insurance company 3 weeks ago. "To whom it may concern, I am writing to increase my life insurance policy from $50,000 to $200,000. My daughter Jessica Patterson should be contacted regarding any changes to my policy, as I have been experiencing some memory difficulties and may not recall our conversations clearly. Sincerely, Selena Patterson." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. Jessica hadn't just been stealing from me and planning to sell my property. She'd been setting up a situation where my death would be financially beneficial to her. And given how quickly Shed assumed I was dead after the plane crash, I began to wonder if Shed been hoping for exactly that kind of accident. I printed out every email, every bank statement I could access, and every piece of evidence I could find. Jessica had made a critical mistake. She'd been so confident in her plan that Shed left a clear digital trail of her deception. As I sat in that library, surrounded by evidence of my daughter's betrayal, I realized I was no longer just a victim. I was a woman with resources, knowledge, and now, most importantly, the element of surprise. Jessica thought I was either dead or incapacitated. She had no idea that I was very much alive and now fully aware of her scheme. The plane crash had been an accident, but Jessica's response to it revealed the true depth of her greed and manipulation. Now it was time for me to take control of my own life and protect myself from the daughter who'd been systematically destroying it. I spent the next 3 days conducting what I could only describe as an investigation into my own daughter's life. What I discovered painted a picture so disturbing that I had to force myself to accept the reality of who Jessica had become. Using public records databases at the library, I traced Jessica and Brad's financial history over the past 2 years. What I found explained everything. They owed $43,000 in credit card debt, had defaulted on a car loan, and were 3 months behind on their mortgage. But the most shocking discovery was a series of transactions at 3 different casinos in Colorado and Nevada. Bank records showed regular withdrawals of $500 to $1,500, always on weekends, always from Jessica's account. The pattern went back 18 months. She and Brad had been gambling away money they didn't have, and now they were facing foreclosure on the house I'd helped them buy. But it got worse. I found court documents showing that Jessica had filed preliminary probate papers just 6 months ago, claiming I was suffering from dementia and requesting to be appointed as my legal guardian. The filing had been withdrawn, but only because Shed apparently decided on a different strategy. I drove to my family doctor's office, a kind man named Dr. Rodriguez who'd been caring for me for 15 years. His receptionist, Linda, greeted me with shock. "Selena, we heard about the plane crash. Jessica called and told us you'd been killed. We were planning to send flowers. Jessica told you I was dead. She called 3 days ago, crying. She said the airline had confirmed there were no survivors." Linda's face shifted from joy to confusion. "But you're obviously here and very much alive." I asked to speak with Dr. Rodriguez privately. When I explained what had happened, his expression grew increasingly troubled. "Selena, I need to tell you something," he said, pulling out a thick file. "Jessica has been calling our office regularly for the past 4 months, asking about signs of dementia and requesting copies of your medical records. She claimed I'd been acting confused and forgetting conversations. Did you release my records to her?" "No, absolutely not. You never signed a release form," and I found her questions inappropriate. But she was very persistent. She even brought in some kind of legal document claiming you'd given her medical power of attorney. But it didn't look legitimate to me. Dr. Rodriguez showed me notes from his conversations with Jessica. Shed described symptoms I'd never exhibited: forgetting names, getting lost while driving, becoming confused about money. Shed even claimed I'd called her in the middle of the night, not remembering previous conversations. "I want you to know, Dr. Rodriguez continued, that your last physical exam 3 months ago showed absolutely no cognitive decline. Your memory tests were excellent, your reflexes normal. There was no medical basis for any concerns about your mental capacity." As I left his office, I realized Jessica had been building a comprehensive case for my incompetence across multiple institutions. Shed contacted my bank, my doctor, my insurance company, and my friends, each time laying groundwork for the day when she could take control of my life. But there was one more piece of the puzzle I needed to understand. I drove to Jessica's house, parking where I could observe without being seen. After an hour, Brad emerged alone, getting into his truck and driving away. I waited another 30 minutes, then approached the front door. When Jessica answered, the color drained from her face, as if she were seeing a ghost. Which, I supposed, she was. "Mom, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in the hospital. I discharged myself yesterday. I need to talk to you about something important." Jessica's eyes darted nervously around the neighborhood before stepping aside to let me in. The house I'd helped them purchase was in worse condition than I'd expected. The furniture looked worn, there were boxes stacked in corners, and I noticed several expensive items were missing, including a diamond bracelet I'd given Jessica for her wedding. "Mom, you look terrible. Are you sure you should be out of the hospital?" Jessica's voice carried a false note of concern that I now recognized as manipulation. "Jessica, I need to ask you directly. Have you been taking money from my accounts?" Her response told me everything I needed to know. Instead of immediate denial or shock, she hesitated just a moment too long. "Mom, you're confused. The accident must have affected your memory worse than we thought. You've been asking me to help with your finances for months because you kept forgetting things. I never asked you to help with my finances." "You did, Mom. You called me crying one night because you couldn't remember if you'd paid your electric bill. Don't you remember giving me your PIN number so I could check your account for you?" I'd never given her my PIN number, never called her about bills, and certainly never asked for her financial help. But Jessica's response was so smooth, so practiced, that I realized she'd been rehearsing these lies for months. "Jessica, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want the truth. Have you been stealing from me?" This time, her mask slipped completely. The loving, concerned daughter disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "Stealing? Mom, everything we've done has been for your own good. You've been living alone in that big farmhouse, forgetting to eat, forgetting to pay bills. Brad and I have been driving out there twice a week to check on you. We've been taking care of you, by emptying my bank account, by making sure you had what you needed. Do you have any idea how much your prescriptions cost? How much we've spent on groceries for you? I took 3 prescription medications that cost a total of $45 per month, and I'd been buying my own groceries." Jessica was lying so automatically that I wondered how long she'd been practicing these explanations. "And the life insurance policy." For the first time, Jessica looked genuinely surprised that I knew about it. "How did you—" She caught herself. "Mom, the insurance agent recommended increasing your coverage because of your age and health issues." "What health issues?" "Dr. Rodriguez says I'm in excellent health." "Mom, you're 65 years old and you just survived a plane crash. You need to face reality about your situation." I stared at this woman who looked like my daughter but spoke like a stranger. "What reality is that, Jessica?" "The reality is that you can't take care of yourself anymore. The reality is that Brad and I have been sacrificing our own financial stability to make sure you're safe. The reality is that it's time for you to let us help you make the hard decisions." There it was. Jessica wasn't just stealing from me. She genuinely believed she was entitled to my money and property because she'd decided I was incapable of managing my own life. "I see," I said quietly. "And what happens to me in this reality? You move in with us, obviously. We sell the farm because it's too much for you to maintain. We use the money to make sure you have the best care possible." The best care possible. In other words, Jessica and Brad would control my assets while providing me with whatever level of care they deemed appropriate. I would become a dependent in their household, relying on them for everything while they spent my life savings. And if I don't agree to this arrangement— Jessica's expression hardened. "Mom, you just survived a traumatic brain injury. The doctors at the hospital told me you might not be thinking clearly for a while. Sometimes families have to make difficult decisions for people they love." The threat was clear. If I didn't cooperate with Jessica's plan, she would use my hospitalization and the network of lies she'd already built to have me declared incompetent. She'd probably succeed, given how carefully she'd laid the groundwork. As I drove away from Jessica's house, I realized I was in a fight for my independence, my dignity, and my life. My daughter hadn't just been planning to steal from me. She'd been planning to erase me as a functional adult human being. But Jessica had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed the plane crash had either killed me or left me too damaged to fight back. She had no idea that I was not only fully capable of defending myself, but that I now had something she didn't expect: complete knowledge of her deception and the cold, clear anger that comes with ultimate betrayal. The real battle was just beginning. 3 days after my confrontation with Jessica, I received a call that would change everything. The number on my motel room phone showed a Denver area code. "Mrs. Patterson, this is David Kim from Hartwell, Morrison and Associates. We're the law firm representing Rocky Mountain Regional Airlines regarding Flight 247. I'd almost forgotten about the crash itself in my focus on Jessica's betrayal. The lawyer's voice was professional but warm. "Mrs. Patterson, we've been trying to reach you at your home address, but we understand there may have been some confusion about your status. We're very relieved to learn you survived the crash." "What kind of confusion?" "Well, our initial passenger manifest showed you as deceased, and when we contacted your family, your daughter confirmed you had died in the crash. We were preparing to discuss survivor benefits with her when the hospital notified us that you'd been discharged alive." My blood ran cold. "Jessica told you I was dead." "Yes." She was quite upset, naturally. She even began discussing funeral arrangements and asked about life insurance payouts through the airline policy. Jessica had been so eager to claim my death benefits that she'd contacted the airline directly. She wasn't just stealing from my existing accounts. She was actively trying to profit from what she hoped was my death. "Mr. Kim, I think we need to meet in person. There are some things you need to know about my family situation." "Of course, but first, I need to explain why I'm calling." The National Transportation Safety Board has completed their preliminary investigation of the crash. Mrs. Patterson. This wasn't pilot error or weather-related. There was a mechanical failure that the airline knew about and failed to address. He paused, letting that information sink in. We're prepared to offer you a substantial settlement rather than go through years of litigation. Given the airline's clear liability and the fact that you're the sole survivor of a crash that killed 6 people, we're authorized to offer $12 million. $12 million. The number was so large I had to ask him to repeat it. 12 million. Mrs. Patterson. The airline wants to resolve this quickly and quietly. They're facing potential criminal charges from the FAA. And your survival gives you a unique position in any legal proceedings. I thought about Jessica's gambling debts, her attempts to steal my modest savings, her eagerness to sell my property. She'd been scrambling for hundreds of thousands of dollars, while I was about to receive more money than either of us had ever imagined. Mr. Kim, there's something you need to know. My daughter has been systematically defrauding me for months. She's stolen money from my accounts, forged documents, and tried to have me declared mentally incompetent. When she told you I was dead, she was attempting to claim benefits that belonged to me. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. Mrs. Patterson, that's a very serious allegation. If what you're saying is true, your daughter could face federal charges for insurance fraud, especially if she attempted to claim airline survivor benefits. I have documentation of everything: bank records, forged emails, even recordings of her planning to sell my property while I was supposedly unconscious in the hospital. I think we need to involve law enforcement in this matter. But first, let's make sure your settlement is protected. Can you come to our office this afternoon? 2 hours later, I sat in a conference room overlooking downtown Denver, surrounded by lawyers who listened with growing amazement as I explained Jessica's scheme. They'd seen family financial abuse before, but the timing and scope of Jessica's deception shocked even experienced attorneys. Mrs. Patterson, said the senior partner, a woman named Catherine Morrison, your daughter committed multiple felonies by claiming you were dead to collect benefits. That's fraud at the federal level. What I don't understand, I said, is how she thought she could get away with it long term. I mean, I'm obviously alive. David Kim exchanged glances with his colleagues. Mrs. Patterson, we need to tell you something that might be difficult to hear. Your daughter didn't just claim you were dead to us. She filed a death certificate with the state of Colorado 3 days ago. The room seemed to tilt around me. She filed a death certificate? How is that even possible? She provided the airline manifest listing you as deceased, along with medical records from the hospital, showing you were in critical condition. In cases of mass casualty events, sometimes the paperwork gets processed quickly to help families with insurance and burial planning. Catherine Morrison leaned forward. Selena, according to the state of Colorado, you are officially dead as of 4 days ago. Your daughter has legal standing to act as your estate executor, which means she can access your accounts, sell your property, and claim any benefits. I felt like I was in some kind of surreal nightmare. So legally, I don't exist. Not exactly. We can fix this. But it requires immediate action. The good news is that your daughter's eagerness to profit from your supposed death has created a clear paper trail of fraud. They explained that Jessica had not only filed fraudulent death certificates but had also contacted my life insurance company, my pension fund, and even the Social Security Administration to begin claiming survivor benefits. She'd been so systematic and so quick that she'd essentially documented her own criminal conspiracy. The settlement money gives us additional leverage, David Kim explained. $12 million is a significant enough sum that any attempt to fraudulently claim it becomes a federal crime with serious prison time attached. As we talked, I realized that Jessica's greed had actually provided me with the tools to protect myself. By moving so quickly to claim benefits from my supposed death, she'd created evidence that no amount of lies about my mental state could explain away. But there was something else I needed to understand. Mr. Kim, how long has the airline known about the mechanical problems that caused the crash? His expression grew grim. Based on the NTSB report, at least 18 months. There were 3 previous incidents involving similar malfunctions, but they were covered up or misreported. So 6 people died because the airline was cutting corners on safety. Yes, and Mrs. Patterson, there's something else. The airline has been monitoring news coverage and social media about the crash. They're very concerned about public perception, especially if it comes out that they knew about the safety issues. Catherine Morrison pulled out a tablet and showed me several news articles about the crash. My supposed death had been mentioned in 2 of them, with Jessica quoted as a grieving daughter, seeking answers about airline safety. She's been talking to reporters. She gave an interview to Channel 7 News yesterday, calling for better safety oversight and saying the airline should be held accountable for your death. She's positioning herself as a victims' rights advocate. I stared at the screen showing Jessica's tearful face as she spoke about her beloved mother and the tragic loss of my life. She was not only stealing my money and property but also profiting from public sympathy over my supposed death. Gentlemen, I said, standing up from the conference table, I think it's time for Jessica to learn that reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. David Kim smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Mrs. Patterson, I think your daughter is about to discover that insurance fraud carries a penalty of up to 20 years in federal prison. As I left the law office that afternoon, I carried with me not just the promise of $12 million, but something far more valuable: the legal firepower to fight back against Jessica's betrayal and the resources to ensure she faced real consequences for what she'd done. Jessica thought she'd found the perfect crime: stealing from a dead woman who couldn't fight back. She was about to learn that I was very much alive, very angry, and now very wealthy. The tables were about to turn in a way she never could have imagined. The next morning, I sat in the office of Detective Patricia Walsh, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every type of family betrayal imaginable. Spread across her desk were bank statements, forged emails, insurance documents, and recordings I'd made of Jessica's conversations. Mrs. Patterson, in 20 years of investigating financial elder abuse, I've never seen a case quite this systematic. Detective Walsh said, reviewing the evidence, your daughter didn't just steal from you. She created an entirely false narrative about your mental state and then exploited a tragedy to try to claim benefits. What happens now? Well, the federal charges for insurance fraud are already being prepared by the U.S. Attorney's Office. But there's something else you need to know that changes the scope of this case considerably. Detective Walsh pulled out a file I hadn't seen before. We've been investigating your daughter and son-in-law for 3 months as part of a larger probe into organized gambling debt and money laundering. Jessica and Brad owe money to some very dangerous people, and they've been getting desperate. She showed me surveillance photos of Jessica and Brad at various casinos, along with financial records showing the true extent of their gambling losses. They don't just owe $43,000 in credit card debt, Mrs. Patterson. They owe nearly $300,000 to private lenders associated with casino operations in Nevada. These aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans. The scope of Jessica's desperation began to make more sense. She wasn't just stealing from me out of greed. She was doing it out of fear for her own safety. There's something else, Detective Walsh continued. We have reason to believe Jessica knew about your travel plans for the day of the crash. My blood went cold. What do you mean? Your airline reservation was made 3 weeks ago for a business trip to visit your financial advisor in Denver. But according to phone records, Jessica called the airline twice in the week before your trip, asking about flight schedules and passenger manifests. I remembered now. I'd mentioned to Jessica that I was flying to Denver to discuss investment options with my advisor, Thomas Chen, who managed a small portfolio I'd built from my teaching pension. It was routine business, but I'd told Jessica, because I'd offered to bring her back some specialty coffee from a shop she liked. Detective Walsh, are you saying Jessica knew which flight I was on? We're investigating that possibility. What we know for certain is that she was prepared with remarkable speed after the crash. Most families need days or weeks to begin handling estate matters. Jessica had already contacted estate sale companies, real estate agents, and insurance companies within hours of your supposed death. The detective showed me a timeline they'd constructed. Jessica had called the estate sale company at 8 a.m. the morning after the crash. She'd contacted my life insurance company at 10 a.m. She'd scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent for that afternoon. Either your daughter is the most efficient, grief-stricken person I've ever encountered, or she was prepared for this outcome. I thought about the increased life insurance policy, the systematic isolation from my friends, the careful documentation of my supposed mental decline. Had Jessica been hoping for exactly this kind of accident? We're also investigating whether Brad had any knowledge of the airline's mechanical problems through his work connections. Detective Walsh continued. He does heating and air conditioning repair for several companies that contract with Rocky Mountain Regional Airlines. The possibility that Jessica and Brad might have known about the safety issues added a horrifying dimension to their betrayal. But even if they hadn't caused the crash, they'd certainly prepared to profit from it. Mrs. Patterson, there's one more thing you should know. We've been monitoring Jessica's communications since the fraud investigation began. Yesterday, she received some very disturbing phone calls. Detective Walsh played a recording from Jessica's cell phone. I recognized her voice, but she sounded panicked in a way I'd never heard before. I told you, Mr. Castellano, the money is coming. My mother's estate is worth over $500,000. I just need 2 more weeks to get through probate. A man's voice, cold and professional, responded. Mrs. Patterson, you've been telling us for 6 months that money was coming. Our patience is exhausted. You have 72 hours to deliver $300,000, or we'll be forced to take alternative collection methods. Please, you don't understand. She died in that plane crash. I'm the only heir. The life insurance alone is $200,000. Then you'd better hope that insurance company processes claims quickly, Mrs. Patterson. Because after 72 hours, we start with your husband's kneecaps. The recording ended, leaving the detective's office in heavy silence. Mrs. Patterson, your daughter is in serious danger. These people don't make empty threats, but more importantly for our case, she's now committed to following through with claiming benefits from your death, even if she wanted to back out. I felt an unexpected surge of fear for Jessica. Despite everything she'd done to me, whatever she'd become, she was still my daughter, and I didn't want to see her physically harmed. What can we do? We can arrest her today on the federal fraud charges. That would actually protect her from these loan sharks while she's in custody. Or we can wait and catch her in the act of trying to claim your airline settlement. What's the difference in terms of consequences for her? Detective Walsh consulted her notes. If we arrest her now, she's looking at 5 to 7 years for the fraud and theft charges. If we wait, and she attempts to claim the $12 million airline settlement, she's looking at 15 to 20 years for federal insurance fraud. I thought about the daughter Id raised, the little girl who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. That child had grown into a woman capable of celebrating my death and stealing my life savings. But she was still my child. Detective Walsh, what if there was a third option? What if Jessica learned I was alive before she had a chance to claim the airline settlement? What do you mean? I mean, what if she discovered that her mother wasn't dead, and that all of her fraud had been documented and reported? What if she realized her only chance to avoid decades in prison was to cooperate fully with law enforcement? Detective Walsh leaned back in her chair, considering the possibilities. Mrs. Patterson, are you suggesting we give your daughter a chance to confess and make restitution before we arrest her? I'm suggesting we give her a chance to choose between facing the consequences of what she's already done, or digging herself into a hole so deep she'll never climb out. The detective smiled grimly. Mrs. Patterson, I think you might be more strategic than your daughter realizes, but this approach comes with risks. If she panics and runs, or if she tries to claim the settlement anyway, the federal charges become much more serious. I understand the risks, but I need to know who my daughter really is. Is she someone who made terrible choices out of desperation? Or is she someone who would knowingly steal $12 million from her mother's plane crash? As I left the police station that afternoon, I realized I was about to give Jessica the most important choice of her life. She could face the music for what she'd already done and maybe salvage some possibility of redemption, or she could double down on her betrayal and lose any chance of a relationship with me forever. Either way, she was about to discover that her supposedly dead mother was very much alive and fully aware of every crime she'd committed. The element of surprise Id maintained for over a week was about to become the most powerful weapon Id ever wielded. Jessica's 72-hour deadline with the loan sharks was tomorrow. That gave me just enough time to plan the confrontation that would determine not just her legal fate, but whether there was any possibility of rebuilding a relationship with the daughter Id lost to greed and desperation. I arranged to meet Jessica at my farmhouse the next morning, telling her through a text message that I needed to discuss important legal matters regarding my recovery and future care. She agreed immediately, probably assuming this was her opportunity to convince me to sign over power of attorney willingly. I arrived early and waited in my kitchen, the same room where Id taught Jessica to bake cookies as a child, helped her with homework, and celebrated her high school graduation. Now it would be the place where I confronted her about the systematic destruction of everything it built. Detective Walsh sat in an unmarked car at the end of my driveway, ready to intervene if needed. My attorney, David Kim, waited in his office with all the documentation of Jessica's fraud, prepared to file charges the moment I gave him the signal. Jessica arrived at exactly 10 a.m., followed closely by Brad in his pickup truck. Through my window, I watched them argue briefly in the driveway before approaching my front door together. Jessica looked haggard, with dark circles under her eyes and the kind of nervous energy that comes from desperation. I opened the door before they could knock. "Hello, Jessica." "Brad." They both looked surprised by my appearance. I'd taken care to dress well and speak clearly, making it obvious that I was fully alert and competent. "Mom, you look so much better," Jessica said, though her eyes were scanning my face as if looking for signs of confusion she could exploit. "We've been so worried about you." "I'm sure you have. Please, come in. We have a lot to discuss." We sat in my living room, the same space where Jessica had played as a child, surrounded by the antiques she'd been planning to sell. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mom, Brad and I have been talking, and we really think you should consider moving in with us. At least temporarily," Jessica began. "The doctor said you might have some lingering effects from the head trauma, and this house is just so isolated." "What doctor said that?" "Jessica. The one at the hospital. Dr. Martinez. He was very concerned about your cognitive function." I'd never spoken to any Dr. Martinez. Jessica was lying automatically, probably not even realizing that I could easily verify her claims. "I see. And what exactly did Dr. Martinez say was wrong with my cognitive function?" "Well, he mentioned that head trauma can affect memory and judgment. He said family members should watch for signs of confusion or poor decision-making." Brad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact. I could tell he was less comfortable with the deception than Jessica was. "Jessica, I need to ask you something directly, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer." She straightened, sensing danger but not understanding its source. "During the time I was in the hospital, did you tell anyone I was dead?" The color drained from Jessica's face, but she recovered quickly. "Mom, you were unconscious for 3 days. The doctors weren't sure if you were going to make it. I may have prepared for the worst-case scenario, but that's just being responsible. So you did tell people I was dead." I contacted a few places to understand what procedures would be needed if the worst happened. That's what any good daughter would do. "Including the airline? Did you contact Rocky Mountain Regional about survivor benefits?" This time, Jessica hesitated just long enough to confirm my suspicions. "I may have called them to understand what options existed." "Mom, you have to understand. We were facing the possibility of enormous medical bills and funeral expenses." "Jessica, let me be very clear about something. I know about the gambling debts. I know about the $300,000 you and Brad owe to loan sharks. I know about the systematic theft from my bank accounts. I know about the forged emails and the false medical claims. I know everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's mouth opened and closed without sound, while Brad's face turned ashen. "But most importantly," I continued, "I know that you filed a death certificate claiming I died in the plane crash, and that you attempted to claim life insurance benefits and airline compensation based on that false death certificate." Jessica found her voice, but it came out as barely a whisper. "How could you possibly know any of that?" "Because, Jessica, I've been very much alive and fully conscious this entire time. I heard you celebrating my death in the hospital. I watched you plan my estate sale. I documented every phone call, every forged document, every lie you told." Brad suddenly stood up. "Jess, we need to leave. Now." "Sit down, Brad," I said firmly. "We're going to finish this conversation." "Mom, I can explain everything," Jessica said, her voice taking on the manipulative tone I now recognized so clearly. "You're not understanding the situation correctly. The head injury is affecting your perception." "My perception is fine, Jessica. In fact, it's clearer than it's been in months. I can see exactly who you've become and what you've done to me." I pulled out a folder containing bank statements, email printouts, and photographs of the estate sale signs. "I have documentation of every crime you've committed against me. The FBI is investigating federal insurance fraud charges that carry a 20-year prison sentence. Detective Walsh from the Denver Police Department has been building a case against you for 3 months. Jessica's composure finally cracked completely. You called the police? On your own daughter? I called the police on someone who stole my money, forged my signature, filed false death certificates, and attempted to claim $12 million in airline compensation for my supposed death. $12 million. Brad's voice was barely audible. That's right, Brad. The airline settlement is $12 million. Jessica was so eager to claim my death benefits that she never bothered to find out how much money she was actually trying to steal. Jessica began crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration and anger. You don't understand the pressure we're under, she shouted. Those people will kill Brad if we don't pay them back. I was trying to save our family by destroying me. You're 65 years old. You don't need all that money sitting in accounts, doing nothing while we're losing our house. There it was. Jessica's true belief that she was entitled to my assets because I was older, and in her view, no longer deserving of financial independence. Jessica, let me explain what's going to happen now. In approximately 10 minutes, Detective Walsh is going to come to this house and place you under arrest for multiple felony charges. You have a choice to make right now that will determine whether you spend 5 years in prison or 20. What choice? You can confess to everything you've done, agree to full restitution, and cooperate with law enforcement. Or you can continue lying and face federal charges for attempting to defraud the airline settlement. Brad grabbed Jessica's arm. Jess, take the deal. Please, just take the deal. But Jessica's face had hardened into something I barely recognized as human. You know what, Mom? You want to send your own daughter to prison? Hello. I'm delighted to assist you with our voice services. Choose a voice that resonates with you. And let's begin our creative audio journey together. Shed pleaded guilty to 12 counts of fraud and elder abuse in exchange for avoiding the more serious charges related to the airline settlement. Brad received 3 years for his role in the conspiracy, though his cooperation with prosecutors had earned him a more lenient sentence. The courtroom was nearly empty, except for the legal teams, Detective Walsh, and myself. Jessica's former friends had abandoned her when the details of her crimes became public. Her children, my grandchildren Emma and Tyler, sat with my sister Patricia, who'd flown in from California to help with their care. As Jessica was led away in shackles, she didn't look back at me. In 6 months of legal proceedings, Shed never once expressed genuine remorse for what she'd done. Even her guilty plea had been motivated by self-preservation rather than acknowledgement of wrongdoing. But I wasn't in that courtroom for closure with Jessica. I was there because I'd learned something important about justice. Sometimes it isn't about revenge or punishment, but about protecting others from the same harm you experienced. Using part of the airline settlement, I'd established the Elder Protection Foundation, a nonprofit organization that helped elderly victims of family financial abuse. In the past 6 months, WED assisted 43 families dealing with similar situations, providing legal support, counseling, and emergency financial assistance. Detective Walsh had become the foundation's law enforcement liaison, helping train police departments across Colorado to recognize the warning signs of elder abuse. Dr. Rodriguez served on our medical advisory board, teaching healthcare providers how to identify patients who might be victims of financial manipulation. The foundation's headquarters was located in a renovated building in downtown Denver, where we employed 12 full-time staff members, including 2 attorneys who specialized in elder law. WED created a 24-hour hotline for families in crisis and developed educational materials that were being used in senior centers across the state. But the most meaningful work happened in smaller, more personal ways, like helping 72-year-old Robert Martinez recover $40,000 his son had stolen from his retirement account, or providing legal support to 80-year-old Mary Thompson when her daughter tried to have her declared incompetent so she could sell Mary's house. Each case reminded me that Jessica's betrayal hadn't been unique. It was part of a larger pattern of family financial abuse that affected thousands of elderly Americans every year. The difference was that my survival of the plane crash and the subsequent legal proceedings had given me resources to fight back in a way that most victims never could. Emma and Tyler had moved in with me after Brad's sentencing. At 14 and 16, they were old enough to understand that their parents had committed serious crimes, but young enough to need stability and guidance as they processed the trauma of watching their family disintegrate. Grandma Selena, Emma had asked me one evening as we worked together in my garden, Do you think Mom will ever be sorry for what she did? It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes people make choices that take them so far from who they used to be that they can't find their way back. Your mother made those kinds of choices. But you forgive her. Right. The truth was that helping other families had healed something in me that I hadn't even realized was broken. Each person we assisted through the foundation reminded me that not all families were defined by greed and manipulation. Most people, when faced with a loved one's vulnerability, chose protection over exploitation. As Christmas approached, I found myself genuinely happy for the first time in years. The farmhouse was filled with Emma and Tyler's friends, their laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for too long. Wed turned Jessica's old bedroom into a study space where both kids could do homework, and Tyler had taken over the garage workshop where he was learning to restore antique furniture. Emma had discovered a talent for photography and was documenting the foundation's work for our newsletter. Her pictures of elderly clients who'd successfully fought back against abuse had become some of our most powerful fundraising tools. On Christmas morning, we sat around the dining room table that Jessica had once planned to sell. My grandmother's hand-carved walnut masterpiece that had witnessed decades of family celebrations. Emma and Tyler opened presents while I served pancakes and fresh fruit, grateful for the simple pleasure of watching children experience joy without fear. The airline settlement money had provided security and opportunity. But the real wealth in my life came from relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. I'd learned that love without respect is just manipulation, and respect without honesty is just pretense. As we finished breakfast, Tyler brought up something that had been on his mind. Grandma, do you ever regret surviving the plane crash? I mean, if you hadn't survived, you never would have found out about what Mom was doing. It was a profound question from a 16-year-old boy trying to understand how tragedy and betrayal could ultimately lead to something positive. Tyler, that plane crash saved my life in a way that has nothing to do with the physical survival. It showed me who the people in my life really were. It gave me the strength to stand up for myself. And it led me to you and Emma, which has been the greatest gift of all. I looked around the table at these two remarkable young people who'd shown more character and resilience in the past 6 months than their mother had shown in 28 years. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us reveal the best possibilities for our future. Sometimes losing the family we thought we had helps us find the family we were meant to have. As we cleaned up after breakfast, I thought about the lesson I wanted Emma and Tyler to carry with them into their adult lives, that respect isn't earned by age or relation. It's the foundation of every meaningful relationship. When we allow others to diminish our worth, we teach them our value. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to accept less than we deserve. The plane crash had been a random tragedy, but Jessica's response to it had revealed her true character. In trying to profit from my supposed death, she'd given me the clarity and resources to build a life worth living. Standing in my kitchen that Christmas morning, surrounded by laughter and love, I realized I'd never been wealthier or happier in my life. Have you ever faced a situation where someone you trusted completely betrayed that trust? How did you find the strength to rebuild and move forward? I'd love to hear about your experiences in the comments below. Your stories might help someone else who's facing similar challenges. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in the face of betrayal. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that it's possible to rebuild after devastating loss. And remember, sometimes the worst betrayals lead us to discover our own incredible resilience. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you relationships built on genuine love and respect.